the Amsterdam Torture Museum. This is the final installment, episode 5, within part 1. We will also have another collection of episodes in part 2. This is where we left off. This is the garret. As you can see, the victim is being both strangled and there is a metal screw that has penetrated the spinal cord. This is the rack that is equipped with spikes. It is a platform that can be used for many techniques of torture. It allows the torturer and the executioner to manipulate the body with various angles, making the individual's body more vulnerable to the whims of the torturer. And this gives you an example. They seem to have a team. On the left-hand side of the panel, you see that the victim is having a siphon, water being poured through a funnel. It's a form of waterboarding. Waterboarding just didn't pop into contemporary times without historical precedents. Waterboarding has been part of the history of torture for a very long time. Torture, or rather mock drowning, which is a technical term for waterboarding, creates the sensation and reflex of drowning that is involuntary. Those of us who, when we were kids, would be in a swimming pool with the older brother, and if you were in my family, my older brother would come after me in the swimming pool and he would hold my head underwater. And if you've ever had that sensation, the heart pounding, holding your breath, and then the explosion of relief when breaking the surface of the water. That's an example, that's a sensation that mock drowning induces. I'm going to talk more about submarining in future episodes, but right here, this is part of the experience of the rack. You also see to the right-hand side, you see one of the executioner appears to be pulling a lever that is actually creating tension and stress because the limbs are attached to cords, leather straps that are being pulled tight. And you have other people in the frame. They're probably peppering the victim with questions about demonic temptation, having contact with evil, trying to extract a confession. You've heard me say in previous episodes that the city is a site for drama. And what we see in this medieval engraving is a town square. But there's also pain and torture in its midst. You see this unfortunate soul being dangled, being bound, ankles, wrists, and suspended in the town square. as the public spectacle. More about that. See victims being hanged from the ceiling. You see the rack down here at the bottom part of the panel. You see a victim being torched at the stake in this engraving with townspeople lined on the perimeter, cheering them on. What you have here is another moment of heavy judgment, a lot of religious and moral rationale that serves as the driving force for these forms of pain, punishment, and torture. Now this item is a small portable vise whereby the torturer can attach this onto the thumbs of the victim and then screw tight. The screw. Getting screwed, common phrase, does not have its proper etymology in sexual contact. It can be more easily traced historically to this particular item, this device, to get screwed, to put the screws to that guy, is how we came up with the phrase, getting screwed. The thumb screws, the commonest as well as the cheapest way to a quick confession was to put the screws on somebody until relatively recent 18th century authorities genuinely believed the reliability of such confessions. At that time, various European penal codes still described in detail the degree of mutilation allowed to be inflicted on fingers and toes, depending on the seriousness of the charge. The necessity to find out the painful truth. This is known as judicial torture. A warrant, a torture warrant, would be issued by the courts. Those might be civilian courts, they might also be ecclesiastical courts that would provide the legal basis and justification for this form of torture, which was to extract a confession, whether that confession is a criminal disclosure or one regarding religious and demonic activity, or even impure thoughts. There's a range of possibilities that the thumb screws could be used. But let's get back to museum studies. As you can see, the thumb screws, this particular device, is enclosed in its own display case. The color tone of red provides a backdrop to its aura. It sits in this display case on its own. It would be very easy for the curator to put other items like a whip, the cat of nine tails, etc., in the same display case for visitors to gaze at. But that would violate a principle of museum studies, which is to allow these objects to occupy their own space without competition. The thumb screws in this display case are not competing with anything else. Therefore, they can deliver their own narrative about their own significance. Let me add a little bit more theory from Professor Philip Smith at Yale University. In an engaging book called Punishment and Culture, he argues that punishment is an essentially irrational act founded in ritual as a means to control evil without creating more of it in the process. Let me read that again, because that's a very concise statement. That punishment is an essentially irrational act founded in ritual as a means to control evil without creating more of it in the process. And in this display case, you have the thumb screws, which in and of itself embody pain, used to combat evil as an energy, as a threat amongst us, of heretics, of those who are participating in demonic rituals. More about theory later. This victim is being restrained, but is also being held tight by these cords. As you can see, other people are participating. This notion that other people diffuse their responsibility. It's just not one person participating and taking the blame for these awful things being done, but that responsibility is being diffused and shared. It's with that I want to pause and conclude this final episode, and we're going to pick up with more of this in part 2.